You know, when I started this, I never honestly thought that I could say that in some way Mickey Rooney caused Edward Cullen and not be completely making it up. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to A Well-Read Nerd and the latest in my vampire series. So, today, as you can tell by the title and all of that, we are going to be talking about. That's right, bad boy vampires. Wait your turn. Anyway, to talk about bad boy vampires, really what we first have to talk about is bad boys. And specifically the trope of bad boys, where it came from, how it got mixed up with vampires in the first place. So let's take a little trip back in time to the 1950s. The one place in history I don't want to go. Ever. I'd take the 1300s over the 1950s. But in the 1950s, coming out of that post-war era, you had a sort of burgeoning middle class in the United States. People with discernible income, stable jobs, stable home lives. And with that discernible income, they started giving money to their children. Specifically, the children that would someday, very soon, be frequently referred to as teenagers. Why are teenagers important? Well, teenagers are important in that general sense that they became a sort of commercial class. And by that, I mean they had money to spend, so things started being geared towards them. What does that have to do with bad boys? Well, as media was progressing and was adapting to these new social standards, they started trying to find media that would be appealing to these people that suddenly had discernible income to spend on their products. They also, in a general sense, had sort of a branding issue that I don't think is talked about enough. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, a lot of the male protagonists that were starting to be geared towards these teenagers were sort of squeaky clean. I mentioned Mickey Rooney. He was infamous for his squeaky clean personas and some other stuff that hasn't aged well. But in his movies, he was known for his squeaky clean persona. And then once they shut off the cameras for the day, he was known for being a big old horn dog. And that was something that Hollywood was having to contend with in general, of the fact that even though they have these images in the movies, people are not nearly as clean cut in real life. And that's not to say that darker characters were not prevalent in movies beforehand. They were. However, that was mostly in things that were geared towards adults. So, around this time, there was also a very famous play that had hit Broadway, A Streetcar Named Desire. If you haven't seen it, I actually recommend it. It's a really good play and a really good movie. But it starred Marlon Brando. Yes, that Marlon Brando. And he sort of, through his character, Kowalski, can never remember the first name, sort of gave this new idea of a male character where they're not bad, they're not good, they're kind of messy and complicated and emotional and all of that stuff. And yeah, it was appealing to America, to American audiences. They wanted to see more characters like that. So Hollywood started playing into that, of sort of this dressed down, confident, insecure, like complicated character. To the point where I read an article, Charmed and Dangerous, over on Vanity Fair. I'll link it down below for you guys to check out. That talks about the shift in the aesthetic of the time towards that bad boy persona. And they talk a lot about white t-shirts, how the white t-shirt became the suit of the bad boy in media. And that sort of thing of like this dressed down yet confident character. Somebody who doesn't care what society thinks, who doesn't care about any of that, who does what they want, when they want, how they want. And just that like presence of self that they had. You may be going, what does this have to do with vampires? What does this have to do with why vampires are sexy? I'm getting there. Because first we have to talk about how vampire media in America in like the late 50s through the 70s was kind of faltering. There were still plenty of movies that were put out, some of them more successful than others. But the big names that are remembered from this era weren't American movies. They were actually European movies, more often than not Italian. Uh, some of my favorite movies, vampire movies of this time, are those Italian movies. And it's largely because they didn't have to contend with censorship the same way people did in the US when it came to filmmaking. I mean, heck, boobs were pretty much mandatory in these things. But it was also the fact that I don't think American studios with those constraints really knew what to do with a character like a vampire without treading the same ground over and over and over and over again to the point where audiences just really don't care about it anymore. Then we get to the 1980s, the glitz, the glamour, the cocaine. And there started to be a lot of experimentation with the vampire genre that they hadn't really done before. You see movies like Salem's Lot, Fright Night. Elvira makes an appearance at the end of the decade, and I love me some Elvira. I wanted to be her when I grew up. But also in the middle of the pack here, we have The Lost Boys, and the epitome of the teenage vampire experience. And it's important for a lot of reasons. First of all, it inevitably led to bat nipples. So with Lost Boys, you have the character of David, played by Kiefer Sutherland, and the character of Michael, played by Jason. I think it said Patrick. It's Patric. Let's go with Patrick. Who are sort of playing off each other. They're both teenage boys, but David is a vampire and Michael is human-ish. And it's important for this shift in genre because it's giving you two male perspectives for a vampire story. Specifically teenage male perspectives for a vampire story. These are the idea of the id, like the ideal bad boy, like people who don't care about society or the pressures or anything else. They just want to do what they want. They want to take, they want to have, they want to, all of that. But with this, you also get an interesting sort of thing of David is a vampire. He loves being a vampire. Michael seems like he would like being a vampire in the beginning, to always be a teenager, always being able to do what you want, when you want, how you want. But in the end, he decides he doesn't want to be a vampire. So there's this interesting thing of like choosing to grow up. I read an article over on academia.edu, I'll post it down below, called The Lost Boys, The Infernal Youth of the Cinematic Teenage Vampire. It basically talks about the evolution of the teenage vampire from Lost Boys into Twilight. It's where I got a lot of my jumping off points for this video. I definitely recommend it for you guys if you're more interested in like the academic, like not hard science, but like anthropological, sociological aspects of something like this. Go check it out. There's a lot of interesting stuff in there. It is a little dry, but it's an academic paper, so what are you expecting? It talks a lot about that Peter Pan syndrome. Those people who don't want to grow up and those people who choose to grow up. Less so with the choose to grow up, more so the people who don't want to grow up, which in this case is David. He doesn't want to grow up. And that's interesting, and it adds a new twist to the vampire narrative of like these eternal teenagers. Now, within the context of sexy vampires, why is this important? Well, it's important because this is the first instance where it melds together a vampire with a bad boy. Teenage girls love bad boys, like I already said in the beginning. So by melding the two together, you're basically revamping, for lack of a better term, the genre. You're adding a new spin on it. Instead of these older monsters that skulk in the shadows and kill damsels in distress or whatever. You have these attractive, confident, I don't care what society thinks, I do what I want when I want to, aesthetically pleasing, in the movies anyways, characters that teenage girls can latch on to, that can go like, no, I want that. I want that. And the reason why it's interesting with vampires is the archetypal bad boy had existed before. But by making him a monster, I think there was this hope, expectation that like it would de-romanticize the bad boy in a way. Of basically be like, no, see, he's the bad guy. Like, these things are bad and this is why. Because again, the 1980s tried to harken back to that like squeaky clean image that came before. It failed miserably for a lot of reasons, but that is there of trying to like be like, no, the good guys are good guys and bad guys are bad guys. And I think they missed the mark here with incorporating the bad boy into the vampire, because that doesn't make the vampire less appealing. It makes the vampire more appealing. And here we're going to talk a little bit about the female gaze. So, women are attracted to a plethora of things. The thing they are most attracted to is confidence. And this is important because at this point, I think the focus of the vampire starts to shift a little bit away from the generic focus to the female gaze. Now, that's with interpretation of media. These movies are by no means directed or written by women. There are very few vampire stories that are directed and written by women. But the audience is looking at them with a female gaze. They are looking at the things that they find attractive. The confidence, the exuding control over your element, all of the things that in American society we're told that we should be looking for in a potential like partner. Those things are being inundated into the vampire now. And that doesn't make the vampire less appealing, especially to a younger audience. It makes the vampire more appealing. It makes them want the vampire. So that blew up in their face spectacularly. And also, this is where we talk about Twilight and the fact that the Lost Boys sort of started the ball rolling. But the ball that it started rolling, specifically in the character of Michael, was making vampires psychologically and emotionally attractive to teenage girls. This is important because it shifts the genre. Before, and still a lot have since, we could say, well, people are attracted to vampires because they are aesthetically pleasing, like I said in the last video. And I think that's a male gaze thing. Even the friend that I asked was a guy. I think that's the male gaze of the physical attractiveness. I think a lot of times people forget that psychologically, women are not always geared in our society to purely focus on the physical. The physical is important, symmetrical features, all of that. People like those. But the female gaze has more to do with an all-encompassing personality on top of a pretty face. They look for certain attributes and certain things that they find attractive. Again, this varies wildly from woman to woman. There are plenty of women out there who only look at the packaging and don't care about the personality. That's fine. There's others that only look at the personality and don't care about the packaging. That's fine too. But what this is doing is now basically making the vampire more all-encompassing for attraction, specifically through the female gaze. So before you would have people that are attracted to the actors, now you're having people that are attracted to the characters. And this is where it gets messy, because like, these aren't good people. They aren't. But people aren't attracted to good people all the time. Or I should say, people are attracted to people who aren't good all the time. Like, that's not a basis for anything. So instead what you're doing is you're taking all of the characteristics that in society we're taught should be attractive to a woman, and you're turning them and you're putting them into somebody who you then go is like, no, they're the villain. Well, then how the hell do you expect women not to be attracted to the villain? Sociopath or not. It's like you don't understand women at all. But that does eventually lead to the point where media starts to focus on the psychological and emotional attractiveness of vampires on top of the physical attraction. And I dog on Twilight all the time. I do. And it's because, one, I hate Bella. I do. I hate her. But there are some nuggets in there that are good. Like the fact that vampires are all attractive. Because people are more likely to let their guard down around attractive people. That's psychology. If you're going to create the ideal hunter of humans, you want somebody who's attractive. And things like that. And those things make sense. But they also play back into the female gaze of like, well, of course they're attractive. They have all these personalities that I like, all these personality traits that I like. And this is where we're going to stop here. Because now I have to dig through more media and figure out about the psychological and emotional attractiveness of vampires. Like, basically, what is it, even when they're not, beyond just the confidence and the master of their own element type thing, what makes them attractive? And does the same hold true for female and male vampire characters? Which will be interesting because, like I said, like there's lots of male gaze things. An article called "The Emasculation of the Male Vampire?" ? It was basically a rebuttal of somebody who was like, all of these people just emasculating vampires because they're all emotional and crap now. It's kind of like they don't understand that vampires were always kind of emotional because, well, spoiler alert, a lot of characters were queer coded because they were villains and they could do that. So a lot of times they gave them more feminine or more masculine traits, regardless of their perceived gender in film and media. So I don't think they understand anything. But there's that. In any case, I'm going to keep delving into this. If you guys have any questions or anything like that, anything you'd like to know, because I don't put everything in these videos. You guys don't want to sit through a 45-minute video. Shoot me off a comment down below. I'd be more than happy to talk about it with you or make an entire video if that's something that you would be interested in. So go ahead and do that. And with that, I will talk to you guys in the next one. Bye. So I see you made it to the end of the video. If you want to, go ahead and subscribe up there. There's a video over here that, according to the algorithm, you're also likely to like. Or I have a playlist over here somewhere. Where exactly, I don't know. I'll move it. So yeah, if you want to, hit that like button. Go ahead, hit it. Hit it. Just keep tapping it. Not too many times because it will turn on and off. And if you want to see my secret stash of academia papers about vampires, DM me. I'll totally give you my bibliography.